started here. We have, first up in our plenary session, the session 4, Business Data Analytics and Outlook. The moderator is Professor of Information and Operations Management here at USC, Professor Pat Rushamvishantong. Say that 3 times. Go ahead, Dr. Pat.
Thank you very much. So I think I usually can project pretty well without the mic, but if you have a problem hearing me, raise your hand. Okay. So again, today we have a very distinguished set of panelists today to talk about business data analytics and its application to supply chain management. So here on my far right, here is Wayne Yusei, who's the Senior Vice President of JDA Software in retail. He's really sort of responsible for developing the strategy, overall strategy for the retail space and working with all the senior executives in the industry. Next up here, we have Amy Forte, who's the National Manager of Toyota Sales in North America. Amy has over 20 years of experience in Toyota, starting with operations right here in Los Angeles, and she's now managing the entire supply chain operation for Toyota North American cars and trucks. Okay? And finally, the most handsome gentleman here on my right.
I paid him for that.
Yeah. Is Chris Gopal. Now, Chris has over 30 years of experience in supply chain industry, both with global and domestic companies. Okay? And he has served as executive officers in all the top echelons, consultancies, and companies here in the US and global. And it's really a pleasure to have him here today. So now, the topic of this particular panel here is really going to focus on customers' data analytics and application to supply chain. And I really sort of want to admit here that this topic is inspired by a very thought-provoking, and we say controversial as well, recent article that Chris wrote in Supply Chain Brain just a few months ago. And so Chris here in this article advocating that the next frontier of supply chain is no longer just managing the operational excellence, is now really sort of customizing the supply chain operation to the unique need of each and every single individual customers. Okay? Now again, I know for a fact that this is a very controversial view because as recently as yesterday, some of the senior executives I've talked to have argued that, well, supply chains, all we hear about is reducing costs and increasing margin. So why don't I turn to Chris and have him sort of, talk a little more about this, and well, each of you feel free to jump in at any time. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me back there?
Yeah, I have a microphone.
Okay, I have a mic here, but the thing is like a weapon. Okay. Hear me back there? Great. So I'll divide my response very briefly into 2 pieces, but first I've got to say this has been a great summit. I have learned more about cows and chickens today than I think I've learned in ages. And man, that's exciting stuff.
Don't forget the cheese.
Oh, and the cheese. They do?
We built it.
You built it. Okay. Regarding what the brief Pat just gave me, I think that one of the new concepts, and we are talking with an underlying issue of data and analytics, is this whole concept of the supply chain for one. And that's something, while it doesn't exactly mean literally a supply chain for every customer, I think you get the point. The supply chain today, as more and more companies are looking at Amazon, Nike, whom I work with, several other companies, is really not the old supply chain anymore. As Mr. Chadwick said, it's not your Pharaoh supply chain. It's a supply chain for the customer, with the ultimate goal being customer retention, customer acquisition, EBITDA, and profit margin. And I think when we look at big data and analytics around this, the focus then tends to shift on what data, whose data, why we're looking at it, for what purpose, and then what do analytics mean in this area. Historically, analytics have either meant historical stuff or non-relevant stuff. But today it's coming to mean predictive analytics around the customer and the entire chain. And I'll turn it over to you guys.
Well, I'll speak from a Toyota perspective, a little bit more about my background, just for clarification. So I don't get the opportunity to deal with cows and chickens, but I get to do really cool things with car parts and accessories. So that's my area of expertise, is the service parts and accessories area within Toyota. And to Pat's point about the controversy between customer-centric supply chain and operational excellence, I really think that we would argue that it's both, and they go hand in hand. And you know, with regard to the way we look at things from a data analytics perspective, it's really, from Toyota's perspective, it's really pretty basic. It's always been sell one, buy one, and that is very it really is touching the customer. It's very customer-centric. But I think our challenge and the things that we're starting to look at is trying to find ways to use more predictive modeling so that we can stay ahead of it a little bit instead of following behind. So we're looking at some things in that area to move us along, but it's always a good debate, always a good topic.
And just a perspective, as Pat said, I do spend all my time with retailers globally around the world, and there's no question that today the largest disruption, as the industry refers to, is omnichannel. And supply chain, if you think about retail markets, and the model was built traditionally to drive large bulk amount of inventory from a manufacturer through a distribution center to a store. And now having to deal with all of the online orders, the integration of that. And it's interesting because it's probably the furthest advanced over in the UK. And if you look at seeing what's happening to the retailers and the pressure on the margin pressure they're facing, so profitability is a big piece of the puzzle. And about a year and a half ago, we worked with Price Waterhouse to execute on a survey for CEOs, and about 400 responded globally. And what we were really trying to find out is, why is supply chain not on the docket, right? Why is supply chain not one of the top priorities that you need to address in this omnichannel world? And what was interesting was most of the respondents, overwhelmingly, about 60–70%, indicated that the reason they weren't necessarily addressing supply chain is because, to be in a very crude way, they had things broken elsewhere that were worse off than supply chain, which logically would make sense, because supply chain is probably the area where there's been a lot of advancement, not only from a process but technology. And so then we said, well, what is the number one thing you're worried about? And they said product availability. And I went, isn't that supply chain? And I think we realized that it is an education. It's an education about the supply chain extends all the way to getting the product to the customer now, not just to the store. And that's the big transition we're seeing.
Can I ask you a question? These
Yes.
were CIOs?
CEOs and managing directors.
Okay.
So well, I guess one of the questions that was brought up by all the three panelists here is really the more of use of predictive analytics to get ahead, so get a better signal. Now, is that really, are we, supply chain operation, really bleeding into the marketing and sales functions here? I mean, because traditionally the roles of predictive analytics has really been primarily focused on the marketing folks. Is this going to cause any fundamental transformation about the way the company should be organized? Well, with supply chain subsuming over the marketing folks?
I'll speak for Toyota. So you're right. I think most of the predictive modeling is happening. If you go into our marketing department, you'll see these big screens, and they're looking at social media and seeing what people are saying and so forth. So that's happening there. Fortunately, we're pretty good at communicating, and we have always done a pretty good job closely coordinating the supply chains so that we're keeping up with the marketing efforts. But we're taking it a step further, and many of you have heard in the news about the Toyota relocation of our headquarters to Plano, Texas. And a large piece of that very much has to do with the integration of marketing and supply chain, because our marketing arm right now in Torrance and our primary manufacturing arm, which is in Kentucky, do a pretty good job communicating, but it can be a whole lot better. So that was a large driver of the consolidation effort, and that's why we're kind of moving to a neutral location in Texas. So that's kind of an example of how critical that piece is.
Okay. Christian?
Yeah, I'd like to just say, just a quick sentence on that. It's happening. A company I've been working with and lived in China for quite some time doesn't call it their supply chain, and they're a $48 billion company, global company. They call the whole thing customer order and logistics. Okay, they've already made that jump to that the supply chain should include what the customer wants and how to get it there, and what the customer will want and how do we plan to get it there in the near future.
Yeah, what we've seen is the majority of retailers globally are really focused on integrating the marketing function and the consumer insight into their merchandising decisions. So in other words, what assortment, what range I'm going to offer with a price selection. And I think fulfillment is sort of following along in terms of just reactive measures. Mm-hmm. And most of the conversations I have with executives that are responsible for supply chain are all now getting the mandate. They have to start building in the omni-channel requirements, the marketing insight, the consumer insight. So we do think it's going to follow fairly quickly, actually.
I see. Oh, and also, please, if the audience, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand. We'll have people get the mics out to you. Okay. So I guess sort of building on top of these, I think it seems to me here that the emerging theme here is the power of customers. Customers are dictating now. Not only they no longer just want the product. They want the product instantaneously. Some do. Some are willing to tolerate longer lead times. But with this emerging power of consumers, I mean, it brought a lot of complexities and surely challenges. I was wondering if you could get your thoughts on how your companies or how executives are addressing that using analytics.
Well, I'll just say something real quick. There's two parts to what you look at when you're trying to gain insight to a consumer. And certainly there's the preferences of the product selection and the price point. But now there's this new paradigm about, well, what's the fulfillment option, the preferred fulfillment option? Because most retail operations today, even though they may have some integration on omnichannel, they only really know where the customer actually was able to get the product fulfilled. What they don't know is what the origination point of the customer where they really wanted to get it fulfilled. And so you have two elements of integrating this into your operation. One is execution. Every day, I already have made decisions of inventory. It's planned, it's positioned. How flexible and agile can I be from a cost perspective to serve the customer and move inventory to serve that customer? But the real opportunity in our world is in the planning side. If I actually have an item that has a propensity to be shipped to home 80% of the time, then why am I planning that inventory in my stores? Because what's happening is retail is reacting to this measure. We have a lot of initiatives going on around in-store picking. Because now retailers said, oh, I've got all this inventory. I'm going to make my stores a fulfillment center. They're part of my supply chain. But that's a reactive measure. If I knew that I would have had that item being shipped to home 80% of the time, I would have put it in a highly productive fulfillment center. So that's where we believe the real opportunity for the value equation that we've been discussing today is in the ultimate supply chain planning piece.
Amy or Chris?
I think for my area, it's funny, service parts, the customer doesn't really know what they need. They just know their car is broken and they want to get it fixed. I think for the accessory side, we're always challenged with understanding when something new comes out, when we're about to launch a new vehicle, a new model, a new Lexus or Toyota Scion, what does the customer want? What are the options that they want? What's the mix? And what are those add-on aftermarket accessories that they want at the very end? And it's challenging from a data perspective because we don't always have a lot of history, especially if we're coming out with a new model or entering into a new segment. So that's where, for lack of data, that's where the relationship with marketing comes in. It's very critical, and the relationship with the field. And to some degree, especially on the Lexus side, looking a little bit more into what we're hearing from social media. Mm-hmm. So it's always a challenge.
Chris, do you want to add anything?
Got a couple of comments about that. I need to use this more. About a year and a half ago, I did a planning session, actually a strategy session, with what we called an ecosystem. This was a high-tech electronics company. So the ecosystem was about $180 million worth of companies in there. And we came up with different things that we had to do jointly as an overall supply chain to get to the customer and beat the heck out of our competition. One of the key elements in there was knowing the customer. And we all agreed on that, and that was cool. Except nobody had the faintest idea what they meant by it. And today, Das talked about Facebook as a country bigger than most other countries, and we have all these people texting and messaging and the ubiquitous computing and the all-empowered customer and consumer. The only problem is we, as a group of 40 executives, were stuck with saying, what do we actually want to know about the customer? Who is this customer you're talking about? Are all customers equal? And they're not. And when we talk about predictive analytics, whose customer behavior, whose customer needs, whose differentiated service offerings are we actually talking about? And I think somewhere along this discussion, we might want to just look at that, because I don't have an answer to your question. You know, like all smart executives who've been in supply chain for over 35 years, I have a lot of questions for your question. But I think the issue is stepping back a thing further and saying, what sort of information do we actually need, from whom, and how important is it? Just some thoughts.
So I guess just to follow up, so in your article you did mention about this micro segmentation. Does that sort of related to this particular issues of what piece of customers' informations we are interested in that will be the I guess indicative or predictive of customers' behavior?
Yes, and micro-segmentation is one of the critical initiatives by many companies today. It's the trend of the future. There's no doubt about it. And the question is, how do you segment a supply chain, starting from the supplier all the way not only to the customer or the consumer itself, but down to the extent where that customer is serviced. So it's a customer experience, as somebody called it. And I think that's what a lot of companies are looking at, things like cost to serve, differentiated service offerings, as well as the whole analysis of which customers to segment into.
You want to add anything, Wayne, from retail side?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of work that's gone on around in the consumer and the insight, and as they refer to the term as path to purchase, right? What is the consumer actually doing, using all of the technology and information to shop the brand and actually get to the point of the purchase? And now, you know, a lot of the retailers are looking at, well, what's the journey, you know, to fulfillment, right? What is it really going to take to gain that insight and segment my supply chain, which to us is a combination of the product behavior and the consumer behavior, right? I think there's been a number of exercises that have been implemented in the industry around the segmented supply chain, which has historically been by type of product. It had nothing to do with customer. And I think that's your point, Chris, is there's a lot of opportunity to start aligning the staging of that inventory much closer to the preferences of those consumers. Because it's the reactive delivery of the product is where the cost lies. You know, the last mile delivery, everyone keeps talking about how flexible can I be. That's where all the real hidden costs are.
Okay, so I guess one of the things that this is one of my particular interest here is, I think Amy also mentioned this here, like dealing with cars like Lexus. There's just millions of options and accessories. And so how do we manage? I mean, this is going to be, it seems to be the trend here, that we have like more and more SKUs available. And how do you manage these? I mean, how can analytics help us in this area? Because that, I can imagine that would be a problem for many of the companies.
We take such a simple approach that I think a lot of people would be surprised. I mean, we're very high tech in terms of our products and what we put out to market for the customers. But on the back end, it's relatively simple. And with managing the number of SKUs that we get with every new model year, you know, we have kind of old systems, frankly, that would probably surprise a lot of people, but they work really well.
Can you elaborate more on that?
Sure. I mean, we're, you know, on the accessory and part side, which I know more about than the vehicle side, frankly. Our systems are homegrown for the most part. We have a few things that we've brought in from the outside that help us with forecasting and estimating and so forth. But it's relatively simple, and they work well. So, you know, we've kind of stayed with what we have, although we're always kind of looking to see what else is out there. But we've been able to manage the SKUs, and you know, frankly, it came up in one of the sessions this morning. We've been able to commonize our parts. So that's helped tremendously with being able to manage the number of we call them part numbers, keep that under control. So that, as well as retiring parts that we don't use anymore.
Okay.
I'd just like to make one point
Please,
on that.
please.
I mean, the discussion this morning and the relevance to this doesn't fail to escape me. You know, we talked about cattle and cows. By the way, most consumers don't really know what they want, and they are often told what they want. Okay, they operate in herds. Once you figure that out and can grab that into different segments, you've got 85% of the issue done. There are not a zillion customers. There are selected groups of customers who move around in herds, basically. And we did some analysis and stuff like that with this group that we are talking about, and that's what we discovered. Back to livestock again.
Well, and just on that note, you know, it's not like some of the, you know, history in terms of problems that have been solved in fast-moving consumer goods. There's a discipline around category management, which is very mature. And it's based on the concept of a consumer decision tree. If you're going to select a product in a given category, you're going to follow a decision tree. And I always like to use light bulbs because it's an easy example. If you're trying to buy light bulbs, the first decision in the tree is it has to fit my fixture. That's non-negotiable. So that automatically tells me I have to have a limit, X number of choices, you know. But as I start going into wattage and color and things of that nature, I can rationalize some of that. And if you remember, back in the 90s, there was the SKU rationalization projects, right? And it was all about optimizing to the shelf. But there's no reason you can't take some of those disciplines and optimize to the customer. Because we all want limited. We don't want too many choices, by the way. I believe 100%. We don't know what we want in terms of that. We just have a general idea.
So I guess another one important topic, so I want to make sure, again, this is also touch on what Wayne was talking about in the JDA CEO surveys about this omni-channel. Now it's really, the customer's experience now is really, in addition to like sort of, you know, delivering the customer experience, in the report you also talk about brand reputation and using supply chain to keep the customers coming back. So really, it's almost like a competitive tool. So I was wondering if you can elaborate more on that and if there's an opportunity for analytics to be applied in that setting.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about the challenge a lot of these companies have in their brand is not to disappoint, right? And I have customers today that you go online to their website and they will show you inventory visibility in the store. But the quantity that they're showing you available is less than what they actually have. Even if it means to the fact that they actually have 2 in the store and it's showing 0. Because they're making the trade-off decision to disappoint you at the point of your evaluating it online versus telling you they have it and you drive to their store and get there and they don't have it. And so everyone's hedging their bet because they don't have the real-time sophistication yet. They know someone could be walking down the aisle and picking that item up. So it's a real challenge for these organizations to make sure that the brand promise, which is, by the way, not only the choice and the price, but the actual product being delivered is managed. And I think you're going to see a lot of focus around that, not just from a profitable perspective, but also a customer sat. Because you're right, you cannot serve every customer the same way.
I think for us, you know, like I talked about before, the parts business is really driven by the service business. Nobody buys a Toyota or a Lexus because they know they're going to get their part. But we want to make sure that the service experience is stellar, is the absolute best, so that they're delighted, and when they make their next, you know, vehicle decision, they come back. So you know, we're always thinking about that, and you know, the auto industry, it's always been a little bit challenging. Toyota was one of the first to introduce daily order, daily delivery, and we do nighttime unattended delivery to our dealers. But there's only a couple of companies, and I think we were the second to do this, that have been able to introduce same-day service. So we actually do have the ability to get you know, the part to the dealer if they don't have it in stock. We also help the dealer set their parameters and make sure that they're going to have what the customers need. But we're really excited about same-day service. It's a huge initiative for us, and we're in many of the major metro markets at this point. But that's our way of contributing to the customer experience.
Christian?
Just one comment. If you look at Disney, which is a premier company, the supply chain is all about brand promise. They'll tell you that. They operate that way, and that's what it's about. And that's what happens with a lot of companies. The supply chain is about delivering on the brand promise.
Now, so I guess we are just about to wrap up, and I saved this one question for last. So I'm actually heading up the new master program in business analytics here offered by USC Marshall, which is being launched as we speak this semester. We have our first cohort here. So I guess as a teacher, I'm always curious in terms of you, what are you looking for in our graduate in terms of the analytical skills? I mean, it's getting, the world is more complex, and there's so many tools that one can use. What are you looking for in our graduates, especially?
I could just speak for my customers. I would tell you that there's, the term big data, right? It's just meant to elaborate that there's so much information. And we have a philosophy that it has to be consumed in a meaningful way. And whatever you decide the analytical process to be and whatever insight you gain from it, if someone cannot make a business decision on that information, then you're missing the whole picture. So what I would suggest is as much as you get into understanding insight, help translate that insight and how it could be used, again, in a meaningful way for a positive business decision, i.e. profitable. That would be my suggestion.
Mine is, you stole mine. That's exactly what I was going to say. And to add on to it, it's presenting it in a meaningful format that's very engaging and not just a bunch of numbers. So being able to do the analysis, being able to make a recommendation on the analysis, but also presenting it and communicating it really well in a really concise way. And then the second thing that comes to my mind is, it's easy to pull data and to analyze. No, it's not easy, but we all have data available to us. People know it's their job to analyze and to come up with the story behind it. But what's so critical, and it's so critical in our business and it's part of our culture, as many of you probably know, and that is to go out and see. So go look at your data, but go out to the source, go out to the shop floor, as we say, and see the transactions happening firsthand, because sometimes what you see in the data isn't really what's happening in real life. And so being able to build those relationships with people on the operations side is so critical. So it's that combination of the analytical, critical thinking, and also the soft skills, the relationship building, and going to the shop floor is so critical.
Chris?
I'll preface my remarks by just drawing your attention to something around this whole big data, the new buzzword of today. Is it hype or is it hope, they say? There are 4 pieces to this, if you look at it. The first is data. There are tons of structured and unstructured data from all over the place in the company, the ecosystem, outside reports, everything. That somehow is translated to information, which is parsed and put together so that somebody can read it and make some sense out of it. That in turn, hopefully, is translated into insight, unless it goes to marketing, in which case it's translated into mistakes, but those are insights. And then comes knowledge. You make decisions on that stuff. You make hard decisions. I think the students and the things that we need to be done is to look at this, and the overall thing that I look for in hiring people is critical thinking. Critical thinking as to what am I actually doing with this stuff, then how do I use it, how do I present it and report it, what actions can I take from it, how relevant is it?
Are there any questions from the audience?
Easy ones.
Easy ones? No questions? Everything crystal clear?
Oh, no.
Sally.
Yes.
Which software package do you use for predictive modeling? We learned SAS Enterprise Data Miner.
We're using SAS for some of our service parts, history, and forecasting. Yeah, but not all of it. Some of it we're still doing a little bit homegrown.
Yes. Can we?
Not a question, but a comment about seems to work for me as a customer. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
We'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
So we have learned quite a bit about big data today. That is analytical power. It will give us actionable insights to do. What I'm wondering is, now we have got the insights, so business can make a decision. How to integrate the other processes of business so that the decision is executed properly? Because like if it is, the decision is in the made in silo, it may not flow in the execution channel and may not be effective. How to integrate other departments or trading partners to execute that decision? Is that are you facing this challenge in the industry, or that is not a problem at all?
It's a big challenge. Probably over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say there's this concept of integrated planning and execution, and it was to address exactly what you're describing, is that decisions were made in siloed. And so if you had in the retail model a merchant making a buy decision, historically they didn't necessarily have visibility or knowledge of the implication of that buy, i.e. how much is it costing me to flow that product through my network. So the supply chain folks got, they figured out pretty quickly that they needed to help the merchants make better decisions, so they took planning teams, supply chain planning teams, and co-located them right next to the merchants, for example, to start building that. So these things have been going on. The challenge with consumer insight is, first of all, our experience is the industry hasn't figured out what's relevant and what's not. And once they start to get some clarity of that, then how do you translate that into decisions, right? How many of you in the room actually have a loyalty card at your grocery store? How long have you had it? 5 years, 10 years? How often do you get specific targeted marketed promotions about the products that you buy? And if you do, you may have only got it recently. And why aren't they giving you your shopping list proactively? The data's there, the information is there. It's just a big transformation to change the operating model and how we work and make decisions to support it. So that, your point's well taken. That's going to be where a lot of the work's going to lie in. Is not saying we don't have the science and the analytics. It's how do you get human beings to make decisions with that?
Yes, Dan?
This might be a naive question, but I've heard a lot today about analytics and such. What is the difference in definition between data analytics and the more traditional old school terminology KPI, key performance indicator? Is there a difference? And if so, what is it?
I'll take a bad crack at that. Data, for instance, is all the pieces of information on performance, transactions, you name it, purchase orders done, line items, all pieces of that constitute data. KPIs are key performance indicators, which can be up, down, or sideways, starting from EBITDA and ROIC, and going down to process improvement or P2P or whatever. Those stand as the two extremes of what you're talking about.
I think, would you say KPI is it's a output of the overall data? It's what you choose to focus on. So I think of it as an output or a subset of. I don't know if that's correct.
No, your question about analytics and how does it vary, right, from, I think if you look at the ability to gain more data points and insight than the common metrics of your operating performance, and that's getting visibility. We talked earlier about demand, right, the demand signal and shaping demand. That's not a KPI, right, in shaping demand, but you absolutely can do that if you have analytics to support what actually you believe that you need to start influencing their behavior, right? The Zara's, H&M's of the world, that's why they turn their inventory 44 times a year. Because they want to ensure that they are influencing and shaping demand. And so that's an analytical thing that drives how to do that, which is different than necessarily the inventory turn KPI. That's how we see it.
Thank you.
There's a last question.
I just want to add to it. I think I can speak to data analytics and KPI. My life is around that. KPI is a measure that you measure to either perform, depending upon performance or whatever. The company decides on what kind of metrics you want to use, such as inventory turns or whatever. Whereas analytics is an information that you gather. Every product or every thing that is out there, there is a metadata or a attribution, such as the product looks good. So you start looking at it and doing a trend of how people are using it, why are they using it. All that then relates to analytics. Analytics is nothing but you're doing an analysis of something. And then that analysis results into you telling, oh, I want to do this. A couple of days ago, I was having my daughter go to change her tire. Dad, they said I should change the front tire and the back rear wheel on the other side. What's going on out there? Why are they recommending that? There's a practice out there that the tires are rotated. And the way they are rotated has a pattern. If your front tire breaks, you're guaranteed that the driver's end of the tire breaks, it's guaranteed that the other end of the tire breaks if the person is doing it. So there is an analysis around that, and they get to know what happens. So every little product that is out there has some kind of analysis out there. In the marketing terms, people know which products they are buying, which they are not buying. That's not KPI, that's analytics. But in a manufacturing firm, inventory turns, how many you need to keep as inventory, those are all the measures that you use as KPIs.
Okay, well, I think we're running out of time. I want to really thank you, all of the panelists here. Thank you very much. And we have a small gift for each one of you.
By the way, I want to know the name of that service station for the tires. My tire guy just wants to sell me new ones, that's all.
Are these the gift for the speakers? Do you have the gift for the speakers of our panelists? The gifts?
I will have to get that for you. I'm sorry, I'm low on those.
Who do I give this to?
Sorry.
No worries.
Where did we put this?
Never mind. That was fantastic. Thank you, team. That was really, really informative and useful. And Chris Gopal, thank you for your usual fun sense of humor. We like the spice you add to the team. Up next, a real industry freight forwarder leader. He was a vice president of Excel Logistics, DHL Global Forwarding, a real guru in our industry. He held numerous workshops and certifications to educate the logistics industry, and he's going to talk about the challenges and opportunities in logistics and distribution. And I just noticed the other day when I got one of his webinar announcements that he actually made up a new word, freebinar. So that's a free webinar. So Frebinar. See, he keeps correcting me. I can't get it right.
Yep.
Dan Gardner, come on up.
Call Webster. Thank you. Can we get this wireless mic? Is it on? Are we good? Okay, excellent. So, here we are, the home stretch, challenges and opportunities in logistics, warehousing, and distribution. First and foremost, on behalf of my company, Trade Facilitators Incorporated, I'd like to thank USC for the opportunity to be here. Would also like to introduce my good friend Kent Hines, Senior Director with Cushman & Wakefield, and Noel Massey, President of SoCal. I can only imagine the largest region in the country for UPS. So, and especially want to thank you all for sticking around. I don't know if you fellas have picked up on this, but we have a few things working against us at this time.
Cocktails. Cocktails.
4:20 on a Friday afternoon.
Friday afternoon.
In downtown Los Angeles.
Through their final work through.
Right. Yeah, we're looking good here. It's 4:20 in the afternoon. We're the only thing standing between our group and a cocktail. We're short because, unfortunately, one of our panelists couldn't make it today, so I can hear the crickets in the background already. So I think we should just send out for a six-pack, have it brought back in here. We sit around.
Right. I like that answer.
Pretend like these guys and ladies aren't even here. If they want to listen, fine. Otherwise,
all I know is I can give some predictive analytics right now.
Yes.
They want to drink.
Yeah. Here's a predictive analytic. I'm good for a 12-pack and a cab to PV tonight. How's that sound? Okay, so we're going to take a little more tactical approach to the conversation. And although it may seem, some of the questions might seem SoCal-centric, if you're involved in supply chain, global supply chain, and logistics in the United States, you're somehow touched by SoCal in one way, shape, or form. So in no means is this geocentric. I think it's global, but on a local scale. So of course we want to welcome questions. Even though it's a limited panel, the brain power, at least on this side of the stage, is pretty strong. So let's keep it interactive, keep it light, and maybe even have a few laughs, right?
Love it.
All right, so, and this is a pre-prepared script, by the way. Both B2B and B2C e-commerce has taken off in domestic markets over the last several years. Whether one looks at the US, China, or countries in Europe, there's no denying the significance of e-commerce and omni-channel. We hear that about 1,000 times today. Purchasing practices moving forward. However, the next obvious step is for B2B and B2C to go international, which is to say that goods will be moving from one country to another with a series of potential extra logistics and custom costs along the way. Given the complexity of international e-commerce transactions compared with domestic ones, everybody take a deep breath, we're getting to the punchline here. What are the logistics challenges and opportunities for companies like Amazon or someone located here in SoCal, Newegg, in this field?
Let me just say, first of all, the biggest challenge for e-commerce in general is to not make bad assumptions. And you know what I get to do differently than most business people is I get to meet with business people. And it really is different. I get to meet with the actual users of logistics, the people that sell stuff. And you know, from healthcare providers to large multinationals like Apple to the middle market shipper in Southern California. So when you talk about e-commerce, you can't. It's not a one. You know, the dialogue tends to go down one kind of myopic perspective, and it's a bad perspective. And so what we say at UPS to our customers is to not make assumptions about the logistics and how it's going to play into purchasing habits, because clearly when you talk about what data tells you, it's amazing what you'll see by segment. And you know, Chris talked about that, and he was very right when he talked about micro segments when it comes to logistics. We've been doing that for a long time. It's interesting to UPSers to hear that conversation, quite frankly. And Amazon is really what drove the shiny object kind of thing. Everybody's like, Amazon, Amazon. And when I meet with a small business owner, and what do I mean by small? They have 200 people. Their revenue's around 150, $200 million. I don't think that's that small, but you know, in the scheme of things, when I meet with that business owner, we talk very specifically about their business needs, their logistics, their product, from print companies to auto parts to healthcare to you name it, stereo equipment, you name it. They do need unique things. And that actually started in the mid-90s. That's not new. You know, Foot Locker was probably one of the most innovative companies from a UPS lens a long time ago around using data to manufacture their product in a just-in-time fashion. They were one of the leaders in that. We actually configured technology for them very specific to that. And they had a big theft problem too. You know, people like stealing Nikes and Pumas. And so they would make fulfillment, they would make orders to be fulfilled, and UPS would deliver in the B2B fashion to the store. And 100 Nikes would go, you know, from the manufacturer to the store, and 70 would get there, right? And so we configured a technological answer to that and took their loss to almost nothing. And we configured a supply chain that was specific to them. The UPS driver was trained very specifically for that account. The UPS driver was taught very specifically how to manage that account, and Foot Locker got a configured solution. Today, that's normal. Today, that's normal. Configured solutions, whether it's B2C or B2B, are normal. The expectation, Toyota, you just heard the conversation around Toyota with auto parts. They have to have a very reliable logistics process to make delight happen with their customers. That's normal. So the B2C phenomena has changed UPS's whole infrastructure dramatically. It has changed our whole paradigm dramatically, and we're experts in the space. And the fact of the matter is that if you look at what, and again, you talk about predictive analytics, no one predicted this. And we're the best at it, and we didn't predict it. We did not see the Amazon phenomena happening as fast and as quick as it occurred. And so I think you saw some of that with our infrastructure investments. We announced that we're dropping another $400 million in the buildings and facilities in order to address the phenomena of e-commerce. It's going to go from where it is today. By 2020, it'll double. And then finally, what I'll say on the Amazon front, Amazon's biggest concern is Alibaba.
That's right.
Okay, make no mistake about it. Amazon is a company. It has owners and shareholders. Alibaba is backed by a nation. And just like Yahweh. And you need to understand the power of that. That the supply chain will look substantially different in the next decade than it does today. And there's going to be a lot of players in it, like China Express, quite frankly, a huge company. And everyone's looking to put their footprint globally, as we have begun doing as well.
Kent. Well, you take Amazon and eBay and you combine them, and you may have an Alibaba. So you have a company that has struggled to make any money at all, and you have a company that's making 40% return. You have a company that has a strong reliance on transportation through my friend here, Noel, versus a reliance on 2 million independent delivery people in their core country. So I think that the e-commerce conversation, I think, is going to turn into like Alipay. It's going to be Ali-commerce. I just made that up.
We're inventing all kinds of words here today.
When I stand up here, I feel like Oscar and Felix, man.
It's probably pretty close.
And half of them aren't laughing.
Okay, so here's the benefit of monitoring a panel with 2 people on it at 4:30 in the afternoon. I not only get to ask the questions, I get to answer them too. And I had the benefit, although we shared the questions prior to the session, had a little bit more time to prepare. So the question was, at the end, given the complexity of international e-commerce compared with domestic ones, what are the challenges? I think it comes down, and we said it would be a tactical conversation, it's going to come down to increased inventory in every country. Because think of Amazon or whomever, Newegg, shipping from the United States to Mexico in a B2C environment. It's not a big shipment, so there's going to be minimum charges. There's going to be customs clearances that a consumer in Guadalajara could care less about. There's going to be additional costs. So how do you solve that? You put inventory in the country. However, those goods aren't made in the United States. They come from somewhere else. So there's customs duties between goods going from China to Mexico, let's use wearing apparel as an example, upwards of 25% without considering value-added tax. So how do you deal with that? I think that the inventories are going to increase, which of course imply warehousing and distribution infrastructure increasing. Retailers are going to have to ship more from stores to reduce the amount of space that they're taking up. And, mark my words, the use of foreign trade zones in e-commerce, talk about ASEAN, talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, you will see a continued growth in the use of free trade zones. So, let's move on. And these aren't in order. I'm trying to bring them up as listening to earlier conversations and such. So, there's no shortage of stories about companies bailing out of California. Whether it's Toyota moving to Texas or Tesla building a battery plant in Nevada instead of California, and this is a real estate question, so Kent, I'm interested in your perspective. It's clear that California has become too expensive for some companies' tastes. It's a fact, and it's perfectly understandable from an economic and shareholder perspective. Does this phenomenon apply to the warehousing, distribution, and logistics business, not only in Southern California, but the entire United States? And if so, what is the future of logistics-oriented real estate in Southern California, which of course is a huge part of an overall total cost of ownership in a supply chain? Your insights, please.
No. I think to compare the Toyota situation and the Tesla situation are two completely different conversations. Toyota, as was mentioned earlier, they have their manufacturing plant back in Georgetown, Kentucky. Sales and marketing now is out here to kind of centralize their operations. Made a lot of sense. I can't really speak to the Tesla other than, you know, they tried to find the best deal that they could find. A lot of counties around the country are offering economic incentives to get companies to move that way. At the end of the day, whether those things pay off, I think, you know, if from what I saw of the projections of what Tesla was promising, that's a reach. So it has not affected our market here. We've probably got the most robust under construction market in the country. Well, we do. We've got 20.3 million square feet of industrial warehouse manufacturing and fulfillment centers going up, going to be completed this year. At the end of the year, we're going to have a 6.4 vacancy, very healthy. Southern California, call it a $1.8 billion square foot market, averages about a 4% vacancy. Whatever set of analytics you choose to look at when you're looking at setting up your network, Southern California, the Inland Empire, always kind of comes to the top because we're the major population base. There's a reason why Amazon's got 3 million square feet here.
Right. So the answer to your question was an emphatic no. And again, the question was, does this phenomenon related to cost apply to the warehousing, distribution, and logistics business? And you said no. So my question to you would be, as the devil's advocate, is why do you see so much action in places like Sparks, Nevada, which is just over the border in Nevada, but close enough to Southern California that it becomes a competitor?
Do you want to?
There's some obvious reasons for that. They've been going on for a long time. You know, the thing that is different today about all of it is information. You know, understand, you know, that when Amy talked about social media and what that gives you for information, it also gives you the ability to talk to people from different places, you know, in ways that were different than yesterday. That has as much to do with people going to Austin as anything. If going to Austin meant you were moving away from your sales base, you wouldn't do it. So you can do it now, like LegalZoom is a great example of that. A California company, I worked with John Sudd, the CEO, on their model very extensively. He really didn't want to leave here. But at the end of the day, when you look at 70% of the U.S. population is east. So what happens with most customers, most businesses, right? Here's one thing every business has in common, Dan. They all start off small. Okay, they all had that in common. Apple was small. Apple wasn't 10 million iPhones. They started off in a garage. Every business has one thing in common. They start off little. And so as they start to grow, things start to make different kind of sense in the process. And where you're going to be starts to matter. I met with a business owner that's in the airsoft gun business. And this is the biggest location in America for that distribution. There's like 10 of them here. Okay, and he's going to relocate part of his business east. And he asked my opinion, this was just Wednesday, where should he go? And I had another customer like that. And I told him, I said, listen, if you're going to go east and you want to hit the most markets you can for the least amount of cost, go to Virginia. I ran that state for UPS for a while. It's on the 95. We have huge footprint there. You can reach Maryland, D.C. overnight. You can get into Philadelphia overnight. You can get up to New York fast, get to Florida in a couple days, go there. So he put up, one customer I had, he's here, and he put up additional square footage in Chesterfield, Virginia. And he said, hey, it's going great. It's going great. I said, yeah, you know, at the end of the day, it's about do people want your product? So when you talk about leaving California, I think you have to look at who's not leaving, right? I think you have to look at like Kohl's.com 4 years ago moved their distribution here to the Inland Empire. Amazon is building 1.3 million in Moreno Valley right now. It's not up yet. We're preparing for it. it pushed me to put in a secondary gateway in Riverside. So in the Riverside airport, they're going to get some business, right, from UPS because I have to grow infrastructure. We're putting up 400,000 square feet in Ontario that won't be ready till 2015 of June. Doesn't sound like business is shrinking. So the thing for us, when we hear those comments, we don't look at them through a single lens. I mean, some businesses are finding that they can do business better in Nevada. Some businesses cannot leave this theater and do well. The other thing you have to remember, and I chair the LA Chamber of Commerce. I'm the board chairman for Los Angeles Chamber, second largest chamber in the country, 1,800 member companies. And so you want to talk about, you know, being in the front row of business conversation, right? Sit in that room. And so what I want to tell you, no, seriously. So because you get all different perspectives.
Are you lecturing me?
No, I think you're right. No, my point would be is you're right on one level and you're not right on another level, and most people are in the same place.
Well, I didn't express an opinion. I asked a question.
No, I get it. So my point would be is that when you look at California and the thought of individuals, there's some very strong opinions about this business movement for good reasons, because you look at it, you got to look at it by community is my point. If you look at Los Angeles County, the job growth is negative. If you look at Orange County, it's not. If you look at San Diego, it's positive. If you look at the Bay Area, it's positive. So a lot of the conversation around job, negative company movement and job negativity has a lot more to do with local behaviors than the state of California. I guess is kind of the point, you know, that I was going to land at.
All right, so no more questions on real estate, so we can gladly move on. Who do you like in the Super Bowl? Let's lighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, right.
Actually, a question related, because someone mentioned about an ecosystem, and a supply chain in terms of logistics infrastructure is indeed an ecosystem. So think of it in that context. No Southern California roundtable or forum would be complete without a discussion on the Panama Canal and what it might do to cargo volumes in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. With all of the investments being made up and down, this is an East Coast question, with all the investments being made up and down the East Coast and things like raising the Bayonne Bridge, dredging channels, expanding container yards, strengthening rail links, and lengthening berth, and this is from Boston down to Miami, so there's going to be some white elephants here, be sure of that. But with all that going on, which of the East Coast ports, if any, is going to come out the big winner?
No. I think the folks that are thinking about diverting product from the ports now have already done it. Where the last 3 or 4 years at CSCMP or IANA, that's been a big topic of conversation. That conversation isn't happening as much. The fact of the matter is the big ships that they're building right now are not going to be able to make it through the improved Panama Canal. And the other dynamic is that, you know, it costs more on water than it does on intermodal. So to take it through the canal and put it in Galveston or whatever, it's going to be more expensive. Your time on the water is just going to add costs, and then it gets there and it's not right, and then you got to send it back, extends the supply chain. Plus
so
the cost
no big winner on the East Coast is your answer. All right, Noel, what do you think
from a
about
percentage standpoint?
Yeah, the jury's still out on that. I mean, you know, the thing that you have to think about when you look at what's going to happen with inbound container to the U.S., you can't ignore our existing economy. And so that's where we get tripped up a little bit in this country, is that we're 300 million people. The world is 7 billion. We're 4.3% of the U.S. of the world economy population, 4.3% of the world population. You know, we do 16.5 trillion of a $65 trillion global economy, so we're 23%. We're saturation. Okay, I mean, we're not going to go from 23% to 24% to 20 in order to get jobs and growth. That's not going to happen. I mean, if we stay at 23% for the next 100 years, that'll be the biggest hat trick we've ever pulled off. Because for, you know, what's in our best interest is that the rest of the world grows healthily and there's a healthy middle class in emerging economies. It is also a fact that the globe will go from, in 2014, and UPS's infrastructure investment looks like this, from 2014